I'm a DABA at OmniTI, and like almost every other company here, I think we're hiring. So I actually got my job with OmniTI through one of the Postgres conferences. So if you're looking for a job, these conferences are definitely a good way to start doing that. So what is Pg Extractor? It's basically a Perl script that uses pgdump, pgdumpall, and pgrestore to get the schema out of the database. There's a lot of options for this script, and I kind of intersperse them throughout my examples just to throw them in there. If you want to see the help file, it might help to follow along with what some of the options are. That is the URL for where we keep it up on the OmniTI Labs GitHub. Basically, the main need for it was we want to be able to dump all the database objects out into their own individual files, and to get them checked into some kind of version control repository. Originally SVN. I also got Git integration with it as well. So why did I do it? You saw Andrew Dunstan's talk. pgdump is, if you're just trying to get small pieces of the schema of your database out, pgdump is not a very good way to do it. And it only has filters for tables and schemas, has no other filters for it. You can kind of use tricks, which is what I actually did with here, with feeding it back into pgrestore itself to get individual objects out. But without those kind of quirky tricks, this is what you have to do. And you only get access control lists and comments for tables and views. Nothing else really comes out with them from pgdump, unless you do an entire pgdump and do an entire restore of all the stuff that's in there. You don't get that stuff out. And the other reason was I had to do gigantic exports, and writing that kind of a pgdump for individual tables gets a little tedious. Even scripting it, that's tedious. So that's some of the reasons why. And also, we used to have an old tool. There's a SVN repository called pgtreats that has a bunch of little tools. We had one called getDDL that kind of got spread around. It used to directly query the system catalogs to get the stuff out and do things like that. And then 9.0 came out and broke it. So I was going to go back and rewrite it, and then I saw stuff like that. That's just to get the functions out of the schema. That's not rewriting the function. So I had somebody that hinted to me about, why don't you just use pgdump and restore? So how do we make it better? Start over from scratch. Literally just started from scratch and went from there. And only uses pgdump to connect to the database. It does not use pgrestore at all to connect back to the database, so there's no worries of it ruining your database at all or anything like that. And it uses pgdump, pgrestore, and the magic of Perl to do more advanced filtering options for the database. The other reason I kind of stuck with pgdump like this too is pgdump it's a core utility that comes with Postgres. Using it to get the schema out is probably going to be consistent through future versions. So it's kind of a little bit more future-proof for this tool, just using pgdump. It's caused some limitations of people asking me for features on it, because you can't do the stuff that some people want with pgdump and pgrestore. So, but I've kind of that's kind of set my limit for what I'm doing with this tool. But it's still allowed me to do a lot of stuff, as we'll see. So here's some basic usage and examples. The first one's just pretty much a basic. You want to get the entire database out, and it pretty much follows this basic format of the host name, database name, and these are each individual folders: a table folder, function folder, view folder, type folder, role folder, and another folder to put the actual dump that I used to do this. This assumes a lot of defaults, like the where the binary locations are, where the destination folders are. And since it's also using pgdump, it can use a lot of the environment variables, like the pg database environment variable, pg user, pg pass file, all those environment variables that you can use with pgdump. This will use them because it's just using pgdump. And it only provides a pg pass file. If you need authentication, there's no passive password option as an option. I did that on purpose. So use the utility that kind of Postgres comes with to do your authentication to stay secure. And to do the host name, there is an option if you want to do a custom host name. Otherwise, it uses the Perl sys host name to make that host name folder. So on the next example down is if you just want to get the tables and views, you can just do get table, get views, and that also only gets the key schema. So I tried to keep a lot of the options are the same as the options you'll see in pgdump and pgrestore, like lowercase n is include only this schema, uppercase n is exclude these schemas. They're all comma separated lists, so if you want to exclude a whole bunch of schemas or include only a bunch of schemas, you do like Keith and a whole bunch of names, just comma separated like that. And like I said, each table in each view is under its own folder, all in its own individual files. The third example, the original intent of this was not to get data out of the database, but it's an easy option to throw in there. So it will by default not output data. So if you want to get data out, do the -- get data option. And since the intent of this tool is for readable, usable stuff, the default for this is the -fp, plain text format. The default of pgdump is -fc. If you really want -fc, you can pass it and it'll get it. Yes? By default it's doing copy. It does the default of what pgdump does. There is an option to pgdump to, if you want inserts, you can pass that option to this. I tried to include as many of the options that were applicable, so yeah. The next second from the bottom one is an interesting thing that I didn't realize I could do. I actually have an option to export objects only owned by somebody. That -o will get only the objects throughout the entire database owned by me. And by default, it exports everything to the directory you're running Pg Extractor from. You can pass that base dir if you want to throw all the stuff to some other folder. And the last option is mostly if you're going to be running this as cron and you want to do this on a regular basis, you can pass the -- delete option. If an object is deleted from the database, it will then be deleted from where you're outputting all your stuff to. So if you drop a table, you don't want it in your Pg Extractor output anymore, you can use that. It'll automatically clean up after itself. So let's see. I'm sorry? This does not keep track of dependencies. This is not something this isn't something that you would use to replay back against the database. This is so. Right. Each table file will, if you have if there's a table like you defined a foreign key in it, the output of that table will have the foreign key definition in it, but it won't reference. It won't. Yeah. Yep. So. You can also actually do a function filter. Just does not exist in pgdump. You can't, if you want to get functions out, you have to do a pgdump, then do a restore back on that dump file again, trying to get the unique string of trying to get the function back. Trying to keep this simple for command line. If you want to filter by functions, it uses a file that you just list one function right after the other, just in that file, and then it will get just those functions out of the database. Let's see. Yeah, like I said, you make sure you have the full function signature. Like there's the dblink exec has all these different versions of that exec function, and also the way this really works is that I first do a custom dump format, like applying the table and filter schemas that I can initially, but so that can actually be kind of big, that temp initially. If you're only extracting like a little bit of stuff from one schema, use the -n option to limit the schema and you'll speed up how fast this runs. Otherwise, it does a dump of the entire database just to get those functions out, because that's the only real way you can do that. So also back about functions as well, overloaded functions, they're all input into the same base file name. So that dblink_exec, all those different versions of that function will all be in the same file called dblink.dblinkexec with all their access control lists and everything along with it. So another option is you can actually use a pre-made list of files to either as an include or an exclude as a filter. So if you have a pre-made list of like 200 tables you always want to dump out, you can just, the trick with the PSQL tool, if you pass -t, turns off the column or the column names, so you just get the rows. and you can just make a list of tables that you want using PSQL, use /o to put that out to a file, and using the --t underscore file option, feed that right back in. So if you can do a query to get your table list and then just feed that right back into Postgres. I actually have an example on production where we actually use that just to get a very small limited amount of the views that we only want. So a lot of the options are the same. Like that's an include underscore t file, exclude will be uppercase t file. Like I said, a lot of the tried to keep it somewhat similar to what the PG dump options were. So. Well, what I did is like here I makes those tuples only, so you only get rows, you don't get column headers or anything like that in your output. You do /o, that sends the output to another file instead of showing it on the PSQL filter. And then I'd run the select statement. That just grabs every table from schema.table name from PG tables, puts it into this file.
So the table filter is the subset of tables you're backing up, but it's not filtering the table itself.
It's the tables list the PG extractor is going to output to the tables folder. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And a note on this: if you don't give a schema for tables like PG dump, it assumes you mean the public schema. For all of the other objects, it searches through all of the schemas and tries to match against them. I don't know if that makes sense. That's kind of what PG dump does by default. For the other objects, I really couldn't get it to work like that. I can only get it to match across all the schemas. So the other fun thing I was able to do, since this was Perl, is include regex matching. One of the things we do a lot of is partitioning tables, and they have a specific format that they go like year, month, day. So we don't want all of those. We just want the parent table. We really don't care about having all of the child tables as output for this. So just a little example of a regex to get something that's sort of like partition year, month. It will exclude all of those tables from the output. So that can save on tens of thousands of partition tables.
So that excludes all objects, right?
I'm sorry? It's all objects, yes. Yeah, it matches against all objects, not just tables. And the original getDDL tool that this was based off of, the reason we do this, and it's honestly not the most ideal way. Usually you'd want to be version controlling your database schema before you put it into production is the ideal way to do it. But we were doing this as like a backup just to automatically get a dump of the database schema every day and put it in version control. So we would just automatically have a history of all the changes that were being done to the database. So the way that works is just give it a path to where the SVN binary is. If you have a specific user authentication for SVN, I used the SVN user file. Just has the username and password in there. You can have a commit message either as just plain right there on the command line, or as the get option shows, you can have a commit message in another file. Both.
The data goes into Git.
The data?
Are you saying we do the extraction? Is this getting the source code, or is this extracting the data and putting it into Git?
This is extracting the schema and putting the schema into yeah. Only if you pass get data, yes it will. So yeah. So if that's you don't ideally want to do this with your data. So by default, Pg Extractor does not output data. So the SVN DEL and also there's a get DEL version will automatically, if something's removed from the source database as far as schema, it will remove it from version control for you. The Git and SVN work similarly. Git assumes like you have a git.git config file, and there's no authentications to options to pass for Git to this. It uses your already set up Git repository. And if you just want to do Git commits locally, it just uses the --git option. If you actually want to push it up to a remote repository, there's also a --git push, and it will push it out to whatever remote repository you have configured.
One thing, a pattern that we have a lot is subset of the data on the dump. So I want to do everything, dump everything older than 3 days.
Probably want to look more, yeah.
We do a lot of that kind of stuff, and then we delete it out of the database, but we want to copy it just kind of offline in case we need it. We do quite a bit of that type of stuff.
Okay.
Filter a subset on the table, you get an SQL. I know that
Yeah.
gets complicated.
Yeah, that would make this an even more complicated tool trying to get subsets of data. But yeah, that would be a way to do that. Basically, how it works. I don't know if you saw John Nerdman's talk earlier. It was his lightning talk that he did. Basically, I do a temporary PG dump of using the schema and table filters that you can actually pass the PG dump and make a temp dump file. I feed that back to PG restore-L, and if you ever do that, you get these nice formatted lists like that. And then I go back and iterate over that to get all the objects out, feeding that back to PG restore-L because I put them in another file. So that's how I actually get. You can see that for this view or for the view, there's actually a separate ACL file. So I just kind of merge those two together into another file and feed that back into PG restore-L, and it restores both of those objects to that one file. That's how I get the ACLs for the functions and all that, and how I do, actually the next slide, some of the challenges where it's getting overloaded functions is pretty much parsing that long list from PG restore-L and like matching all the base function names and putting all those into one file. Doing that same thing with the access control lists and the comments as well. So yeah, that's how I handled overload functions, access control lists. I can't remember, there's a contrib module in there that actually has special characters and some of its table names. And for a couple weeks that was breaking this, and I had no idea why, and I went back and found out that the table name is actually table pipe name. And the system doesn't deal with special character names very well, so I kind of needed a way to handle it, so I just kind of do a hex replace the two-digit hex character, do comma 7C as a. So these little kind of weird edge cases that came up trying to handle this.
How widely is this used in OmniTI?
Every client, pretty much, we use this for. If they have a version, especially if they have version control set up somehow, we always set this up and have their schema being checked into version control. Some current issues I'm having with it. Actually reported this first one as a bug. And somebody actually submitted a patch for me that helped me fix it. If you actually add name parameters, the function itself does the right thing and doesn't put the name in there, but the comment does. So it's hard to match the comment with the function. And the comments are the only thing in the entire dump that actually put extra data in there like that. So it just kind of seemed like an odd bug, hopefully to get it fixed. And I don't know if and Andrew Dunstan was talking about that. PG dump is very, very expensive to run on tables. That's actually how I get all of the data into a single table file, is I run PG dump it back against every table that you want out. It runs sequential index scans on all the system tables every time you're trying to go through that. So if you have, like one of our clients has about 12,000 tables, it takes several hours for this to run. Yeah, well, the thing is, the initial dump will do that, and however long that takes is only a few minutes. After that, it's one PG dump command for each table, so it really doesn't do a heavy lock when it's taking a really long time to run, but it's still hitting the database pretty hard. One of the things I would like to see is if you actually feed, if you do the -T option for PG restore, it does just the create table. It includes none of the table dependencies. The same thing is happening that actually somebody just yesterday reported that they have a view that has an insetUp trigger on it. That doesn't get output with the view. If you do a view, if you try to do a restore or feed these lines back into PG restore, these are all individual lines. You have to feed each one of those back and put them all together. So I think I can fix that instead of trigger option. I can't fix how expensive PG dump is. If I could do the restore -t on the dump file and get everything out, I could avoid this whole problem. So that's one of the reasons I wrote the tool, is to hopefully like show the community what the shortcomings in PG dump are. Hopefully some other options that they can add into the core for it. In the meantime, just write a tool to get around it. This is actually a production example that we have going. It looks kind of messy. The next slide shows how I've been able to clean it up a little bit. But basically the first line is another script that I wrote that we only need a very specific list of views, and it's actually a dynamically changing list of views that we need PG Extractor to output. So I have this script running every day to get that list. And then you can see down here, I have the V file, which is a view include file. I use that to feed back into PG Extractor, so it only gets that special view every day. And this is also, this is run every day to get everything. But we also go back then at the end of the month to get all of the, like every day we don't extract all the partition tables, because that would be ungodly and take forever. So every day we just do a smaller one using the regex exclude to get everything but partition tables out. And then once a month we actually go back and run the whole thing to get all of the partition tables and everything, and also do the cleanup to get any objects that were removed from the database.
I assume you mentioned that your partition is done by time, not by other other distributions, right? So your partition done by time.
By time, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Makes sense. Because
Yeah.
otherwise it's not make sense. They have 1,000 partitions, but not.
Right. Yeah. 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 Like the other pattern I showed you that we have in regex before was a time pattern. So yes, that was the case. Other partitioning where you're doing something by state or everything like that, you kind of want all those tables.
But it's, and again, you need to state this. All partitions, not active partitions, not updatable. So all updates, whatever happened in your partitions, any updates, you will miss that, right?
Are you talking about data or schema? This is primarily for schema. Yeah. So if you're getting all the data out, that'd be. You could do that, but yeah, that would. This is primarily just for schema to watch any changes that are happening on the database. We know like the day of when they happen. We can go back and look in the SVN or get history and see when. Yeah, the DDL changes. Yes.
But you said this could dump data.
Yes, if you want. I honestly don't use that option, but it was an easy option to add, and other people have said, can I just get the data out with this too? So I put the option in there. But this is primarily for schema, and it's what it's really designed for. So I finally learned a little bit more Perl and found this option for the get options. So you can actually make another config file and just put all your options in a list like that, and then just have a real simple option like that. The only thing, caveat, this is the only option that you can't use an equal sign for. It's however this Perl module works. It's option file space config name. All the other options are equal. That's how this one works. So, yes?
Do you have a way to do a diff report?
I'm actually working on another tool to read the output from this and do diff reports on it. I don't know when I'll have that ready, but yes, that actually is something we want to have internally as well. So yeah, I am looking for looking at making a diff tool that will read like two folders that you do dumps on and give you a report back. Yeah. So that is PG Extractor. Any more questions? Okay. Thank you.